Hello everyone, today I'm going to talk about how US President Trump is imposing a 250% tariff on pharmaceuticals. Also, economist Sachs said that Trump has given China a huge gift, and that India would be downright foolish not to pivot towards China and Russia now. Trump has drastically increased global tariffs and introduced the so-called Big Beautiful Act. The negative impact on the US might only be fully seen a generation from now. On August 4th, the South China Morning Post published an exclusive interview with Jeffrey Sachs, a professor at Columbia University and former senior UN advisor. In the interview, Sachs shared his views on several China-US topics that everyone is concerned about. Since the two countries began high-level economic and trade talks, it seems like they've been in a trade truce. Regarding the future of trade relations, Sachs said that the US has yet to realize it cannot impose its will on China. Moreover, China's rare earth threat alone is enough to make the US reconsider its own position. That's why, after the US imposed punitive tariffs on China, it almost immediately made concessions. As for the large-scale tax and spending bills that the Trump administration keeps boasting about and pushing, namely, the so-called Big Beautiful Act, Sachs commented that this bill actually weakened the US from two angles. On one hand, the extra tax cuts in the Beautiful Act mainly benefited wealthy Americans and corporations, but at the same time, they further increased the already massive federal deficit. To partially offset these deficits, the government cut healthcare benefits for the poorest people. This shows that the bill's impact on increasing the fiscal deficit and widening the wealth gap is extremely unfair and unwise. On the other hand, Sachs believes that the Beautiful Act marks a significant setback for America's technological leadership in the 21st century, and fundamentally, it's a big gift from the Trump administration to China. The bill gradually rolls back some of the moderate efforts the US had previously made in low-carbon energy and infrastructure modernization, almost as if Trump is handing things over to China. Exactly, in this way, China should be leading the trend in climate security, low-carbon energy, electric vehicles, and all the green and digital technologies the world needs, while the US will be giving up its future. Sachs bluntly says that this so-called Beautiful Act is nothing but a complete mess, reflecting the failure of the American political system. In another setting, Sachs was interviewed by Indian media. The Indian female host said she hopes India can reach a bilateral trade agreement with the US before September this year. She mentioned that there is ongoing pressure for India to open up its agricultural sector, which is a sensitive area for them. They want to protect their own farmers, so she asked Sachs how India should negotiate with the US. Sachs responded to me, saying that India will become a very successful economy, and when that time comes, the US's attitude toward India will not be more friendly than it is now toward China. This is inevitable. The Indian female host interjected, saying that India is still a developing country and currently the weaker party, so that's why they're receiving care. Sachs clearly disagreed and directly refuted her, saying, "Unfortunately, that's not real care, trust me." The implication was that in the past, the US was just using India, not caring for it because it was underdeveloped. Sachs believes that even if India opens up its agriculture, Trump still won't open the doors wide for India's manufacturing industry. Because Trump's core belief is that low-cost industries from abroad shouldn't destroy American industry, he won't meet India's demands, meaning, he won't let India take China's place in manufacturing. That's just not going to happen. The Indian host then asked, how exactly is the US using India? Because Indians tend to think that the US wants to shift the supply chain from China to India, and that's why America is interested in India's huge population. Sachs bluntly responded, saying that Trump doesn't want supply chains, and by the way, he's a very shallow person. He really believes that America should be self-sufficient and not rely on foreign supply chains. He doesn't want India's supply chain either. He wants all these jobs to come back to the US. Trump doesn't understand that the world economy doesn't work like that anymore. The global economy is based on division of labor, but Trump just doesn't get it. So actually, the reason he likes India and not China is just because he wants to hit back at China. And he also doesn't want India to enter the US supply chain. Sachs says India doesn't have high hopes for negotiations with the US. He tells India not to close the door on cooperation with China, not to shut out Russia, not to shut out the EU, and not to just listen to what the US says. He says the US will tell you, either you're on our side, or you're on the other side. This is actually an old trick of the US. He added, by the way, that they should learn from the British, meaning, don't play the kind of games the British do or make those kinds of deals. In the end, he said, I wish you good luck with your negotiations. Sachs really sees things clearly. First, what Trump is doing is basically giving China a huge gift, handing over the most promising new energy industry of the future to China on a silver platter. Second, Sachs told India not to be naive, not to think the US truly cares, the US is just using them. Even if India opens its agriculture, Trump won't open for India's manufacturing. India should cooperate with China and Russia. In addition, I want to discuss how Trump has largely completed his tariff battles against various countries and now seeks a new front. He plans to impose import tariffs on semiconductors and pharmaceuticals, with drug tariffs reaching 250%. This is a product-specific tariff, separate from the retaliatory tariffs he's imposed on different countries. These tariffs will apply to all countries, with the goal of bringing these industries back to the United States. On August 5th, during an interview with Trump on CNBC's Financial Forum, Trump said that in order to focus on key economic sectors and reshape global trade, the US will announce import tariffs on semiconductors and pharmaceuticals sometime next week. He said, we will initially impose a small tariff on pharmaceuticals, but within a year or at most a year and a half, the tariff will rise to 150% and then increase to 250%, because we want pharmaceuticals to be produced within our own country. He also said that the US will announce tariffs on semiconductors, which will be a separate category. First, BC said a 250% tariff is the highest single product tariff threat Trump has issued so far. However, this US president has previously made similar threats to sharply increase tariffs, but then changed policy. So, there's no guarantee whether he will ultimately set the pharmaceutical tariff as high as 250%. Moreover, at the start of the month, Trump had already threatened a 200% tariff on pharmaceuticals. Bloomberg reported that the Trump administration's tariffs on metals and other industries stem from so-called trade investigations. These investigations can last about 9 months and are carried out under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act, citing so-called national security reasons for these investigations and tariffs. This approach is seen as giving Trump emergency powers to impose tariffs targeting specific countries. Based on this legal basis, the president's use of emergency powers is often challenged in court. In April this year, the Trump administration launched a Section 232 investigation targeting pharmaceuticals. This law authorizes U.S. Secretary of Commerce to investigate impact imported products on aspects of security. According to trade data from the Biotechnology Innovation Organization, nearly 90% of American biotech companies rely on imported raw materials for half their approved products. Over the past few decades, domestic pharmaceutical production has shrunk dramatically, and Trump's tariff policies are aimed at encouraging pharmaceutical companies to move their manufacturing back to the U.S. In the past 6 months, companies like Eli Lilly and Johnson & Johnson have announced new investment plans in the U.S., hoping to build a good relationship with the Trump administration. According to CNBC, the tariffs in Trump's plans will deal a serious blow to the pharmaceutical industry. Industry insiders have already warned that tariffs could drive up costs and hinder investment in the U.S., because pharmaceutical factories in the U.S. also have to pay tariffs on imported raw materials. This disrupts the pharmaceutical supply chain and puts patients at risk. At the same time, pharmaceutical companies are now dealing with the consequences of Trump's drug pricing policies. They believe these policies also threaten their profit growth and their ability to invest in research and development. Recently, Trump demanded that major drug suppliers drastically cut prices, or else face additional unspecified penalties, including an executive order he signed this May. This order reinstated a highly controversial most favored nation policy, requiring pharmaceutical companies to significantly lower drug prices in the U.S. if they sell the same drugs much cheaper abroad. Last week, Trump sent a letter to 17 pharmaceutical companies, demanding that they commit to measures to lower drug prices in the U.S. by September 29. This includes offering all existing drug combinations to every Medicaid patient at the lowest price provided in other legal jurisdictions. The pharmaceutical companies said they are currently studying how to respond. Also, back in April this year, the U.S. Department of Commerce has been investigating the semiconductor market and may impose tariffs on this global industry, which has annual sales of $700 billion. Since Trump took office, the U.S. has already imposed import tariffs on cars, auto parts, steel, and aluminum. However, imposing tariffs on imported chips could significantly increase the operating costs of large data centers. These operators include major tech companies like Microsoft, OpenAI, Meta, and Amazon, who continue to invest billions of dollars in purchasing advanced semiconductors to drive the development of their artificial intelligence businesses. Trump has repeatedly claimed that he wants to use tariffs to stimulate domestic manufacturing investment, including in the chip industry. He praised TSMC's plans to expand its business in the U.S., saying that America now has the world's largest chip and semiconductor factory. TSMC is investing $30 billion in the U.S., building the world's largest chip and semiconductor plant in Arizona. It was announced TSMC plans to increase its U.S. investment to $165 billion over the next few years, not $300 billion. Dr. Pang also said the figures Trump cited are completely unclear where they originated. First, Trump is forcing pharmaceutical and semiconductor industries back to the U.S. through aggressive tariff policies. But nowadays, it's not easy for the U.S. to develop its manufacturing sector. Many industries have long supply chains. Producing domestically means higher costs and still needing to buy parts and raw materials from overseas. Trump has also significantly increased tariffs on these parts and raw materials. On top of that, the U.S. lacks manufacturing talent across various industries, from engineers to skilled workers to young Americans, who now prefer becoming influencers over engineers. They don't even want to do it, let alone work as factory workers. Second, Trump's tariffs on semiconductors and pharmaceuticals are set at a uniform rate, so they don't particularly disadvantage any one country. If the U.S. can't produce these products at a reasonable cost, it will have to import these foreign products at higher prices due to the tariffs. Third, Trump's approach will cause major disruptions to the supply of pharmaceuticals and semiconductors in the U.S. If import costs rise significantly, it's hard to imagine pharmaceutical companies drastically lowering drug prices. Drug companies charge different prices in different countries, and one way to lower costs is to produce locally. Realistically, though, it's hard to imagine pharmaceuticals manufactured at low cost in the U.S.